All right. Project Herpetoculture, episode 38, as I have just been informed by my lovely co-host, Roy Arthur Blodgett, who, despite what anyone out there might actually think, does in fact live in the UK.
Oh, really?
It's gonna go on forever. I'm never gonna let that one go. It's so stupid. All right, so really quick before we introduce our guest for the day, just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. We're gonna have a little snippet here for Charlie, our wonderful audio editor, genius, most interesting man in the world, debonair type editor. Just gonna snippet that in right now. A little bit of a shout out to Dylan, the GOAT at the Animals at Home Network, for hosting our show on his network and his excellent podcast, also the Animals at Home podcast. And we have a Patreon, patreon.com/Project Herpetoculture. We have a small subset of wonderful and incredibly generous folks that donate to us to help us do what we're doing here. We really appreciate them, and it just allows us to continue doing what we're doing, continue trying to make improvements in what we do. Roy, am I missing anything in there in our spiel?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. All right. Well, and with that, I guess now it would be the time to introduce our guest. Our guest is Bryan Suson. Bryan, thank you so much for taking a little bit of time to have a convo with us, man. We really appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, happy to be here with you guys. So,
heck yeah, man. So would you be so kind as to give sort of like an origin story for yourself? Like how did herpetoculture start for you? And you don't feel free to elaborate as much or as little as you want on this, but how did it start for you? And then and a little bit of how did you go from where you began and how you began to what you're doing now, and then if you're able, also at the end of that, maybe briefly discuss a little bit about the great list of things that you're doing currently.
Sure. If I stray, put me in check and get
stray away.
So I would say that I started, my family would go to Hawaii before I was born. And so we would always travel there, and there being a lot of geckos there, I think that is really the root of kind of how I became interested in reptiles and amphibians. So kind of from there, I would say if I could point back to one spot of an origin of where the interest came from, I would say it was probably from that, and that was being exposed since a toddler. But then I would say constantly watching anything animal related. I just was a junkie for it, and I especially had an attraction to reptiles and amphibians, and would keep stuff kind of since I could remember. I was keeping different animals, and it was kind of used as a form of a bribery by my father to get me to train in basketball. So he used that as I learned about contracts and all sorts of business dealings with him through basketball and reptiles. It's a pretty interesting way to teach your son about those sorts of things. But I would say, that was kind of my main origin. And it just kind of, like all of us and anybody who keeps reptiles or amphibians can relate, it becomes this obsession. And it's like there's such diversity, and it's constantly just catching your eye, and you're wondering about these different things when you're little and growing up, and they're just so fascinating. And it's really just the leap off point from dinosaurs if you're a little kid. So here we are. You end up getting a collection, it expands, all of a sudden you're spending so much money on animals, and it's like, well, hey, I got to do something to cover this. And so it was a hobby for a long time throughout the years, and through grade school and the high school, and then kind of after, even in college, I wouldn't say it was really a business. Some herpetoculturists out there who are they have these crazy stories about them having like a legit strong business even in high school. I was not one of those. I was keeping a lot of stuff, but I wasn't really doing it as a business until after college. So, and then, yeah, you just have so much stuff, it's got to pay for itself. And that was kind of how it all began. And now today it's just, become this, it's my main business. So
Yeah. How, just out of curiosity, Bryan, how old are you?
I'm 40.
40. Okay. Yeah. So I'm 30, I'm 36. All right. So we're not too far off. We're not too far
No.
off from one another. That's great. So actually, this is something that I've been eager to talk to more of our various guests about, but can you talk a little bit about what that transition from when it was just a hobby to when you started thinking about it and with more of a sort of like a business frame of mind, and like, were there any like misgivings that you had about that? Did it make you uncomfortable to think about it that way? Did it concern you that it would become more of a work and less of a passion? And then sort of secondarily, I feel like with some people, they may start that way. Like, I'm eventually going to do this as a business for a living. And I think for some of us, it maybe starts as something that's just pure passion. And then at some point, there's like this tug of war that starts to happen between like, what you're paying into this, what you're getting out of it. And it sometimes helps to start having a business frame of mind on the entire operation. So I don't know how that might hit for you, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on all that.
Yeah. I would say as far as a business, it was like, I guess I'm trying to think of how it's a difficult question for me, because I wanted it to be a business when I was in college and was heavy into green tree pythons. But green tree pythons can be tricky and they had other plans. So that, there was a lot of investment into it. And I wasn't really approaching it from a heavy business mindset at that time. It was more so of like, kind of just before I went heavy into chondros, it was kind of more of like, yeah, hey, can make some little side cash here and there from breeding these panther chameleons or these geckos. And but then I kind of shied away from lizards, and that's when I got into the snakes, because I was doing a lot of travel post college. I was like trying to figure out if I was going to go the whole conservation biology route. And so I was doing a lot of travel down to Latin America. And so I couldn't maintain lizards at that time. Needed something that was more, low key, lower metabolism, and green trees were easy for that. And I had already been building up this collection. So I'd kind of cut out lizards, had gotten heavy into green tree pythons. And, there was some turn of events that occurred just in life where I kind of realized that I was going to be situated more at home, and I wasn't going to be traveling as much, because I would do this thing where I would spend probably half of the year down doing environmental consulting projects, a lot of wind wildlife stuff with birds. Then I was also spending, if we broke it into thirds maybe. So I would say the environmental consulting, I was doing a family business back home that I would come back and help out with. And then that other third of the year, I would be guiding down in Latin America and just doing like eco tour guiding.
Wow.
This was a while ago. And so kind of like, chain of events, essentially my father had passed, who ran the family business. And so I needed to kind of come back to home to help out my mother, figure out what we're doing and to maintain the business, which we did do. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to be back more. I'm going to be here now. I'm done. I've got the traveling out of my system. And so, I talked with an old friend, Derek Dunlop, who at the time was, he was one of those prodigies who was like, had a thriving business producing insane species that most people who'd been in the hobby for decades couldn't figure out. He was just super young kid with an amazing collection, doing things right. And he kind of opened my eyes just to just talking with him about it. We were in Australia, and Strophura ciliaris, the northern spiny-tailed gecko, was a species. We were talking about it, like, man, yeah, those would be so cool. And at the time, I only had green tree pythons. I'm like, that would be something that would get me back into geckos. And so sure enough, he's like, oh yeah, those are people send those back and forth from the ham show. There's breeders over there who are producing a ton of them. And that was kind of like when things shifted and I started going heavy lizards again. And shortly after that, I mean, that's when I kind of started looking at it more so as a business, from kind of seeing what he did with his basically created a thriving business. And by the time he finished college, he sold it off and did very well for himself. And so I just, I basically purchased some of his remaining eggs. And had I known what I know, back then, what I know now, I would have bought so much of his collection. But things worked out either way. But that was kind of when things shifted, and I started focusing more on lizards. And I still at that point didn't just say, okay, this is my business. I'm not doing any construction or anything like that anymore. The guiding kind of was just like a way for me to get free trips and go down and have fun and, show people things that I'm passionate about. So I kind of shifted a couple things around, and it wasn't until I started having a lot of success with the geckos and being like, hey, I can do these. This is pretty easy, and it works for me. And so got in with some certain species at the right time, and it just became full-blown chaos. So I had moved. I grew up in Illinois, and I moved down to North Carolina. And when I came down here, I was still trying to I still help out with this family biz, but it's just to help my mother. It's not, don't really gain anything out of it other than it's my duty to help her out. But I was teaching science down here. I was also doing eco tour guiding here in Western North Carolina. And I still occasionally was doing piecemeal consulting gigs for this company. If they needed me for something, I'd, shoot down to different places and help out. But now it's just I've kind of shelved everything, and it's just full blown reptiles at this point. So it's what makes sense. It's what needs my time at this.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's what needs my time. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot wrapped up in that particular statement. You said something just a bit ago about that I found intriguing. You were talking about Derek Dunlop, and you said he was doing it right. And that, I think, I don't know, I'd like to ask, maybe try to pry a little bit on that and ask a little more about what you mean, because I think that that's something that I hear with some regularity from various folks. You hear it in different contexts from different people. That guy's he's doing it right. That chick, she's doing the right moves. She's kicking ass, doing all the right things. And I feel like maybe I wonder if we all have similar ideas about what doing it right looks like, and then what doing it wrong looks like. So I don't know. Can I just ask you maybe to expound a little bit on that particular statement, if you can?
Sure. First and foremost, I would say he was very successful in propagation with everything that he worked with. And what was interesting about him was he worked with such a wide range of animals. Everything from Shinosaurus to, species of Australian geckos to New Caledonian to cave geckos. I mean, all these crazy obscure species, and anything that he picked up, he was very successful with. And so that was amazing to me, because I had never really been in contact with anybody like that. My life was all focused green tree pythons. And so to see his production and his setups were great. I mean, there was nothing that you went there and you looked at anything and you're like, oh man, that's not, it's like raising chickens, it wasn't like that. I mean, obviously with certain gecko species as babies, you know, rack systems work well for raising them up. But everything that he had, I mean, certain rooms with certain temperatures, he had a whole Europlatus room that was, you know, just cooler than, I mean, just everything was temp controlled, and it was impressive. And it, you know, again, someone who was doing this as like a kid, essentially. I think I met him close, you know, maybe it was a year before he graduated college, which is when he sold everything off. So I hadn't known him long to like see that whole thing grow. But when I did come in and our paths crossed, it was still very impressive.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think a lot about this particular. There's a weird similarity between, I think, herpetoculture and like traditional, like classical drawing and painting, or concept art, illustration work, because in that realm you have kind of three kinds of artists, right? You've got artists that are great with organic stuff. They're great at drawing characters, drawing and painting characters, creatures, you know, maybe natural scenery like landscapes, plants. They have organic, very organic line work and organic sensibilities about what they do, right? And then you have this other kind of artist over here that is maybe more of an industrial designer, where their strong suit lends itself to vehicle design, ship design, architectural landscapes, cityscapes, things like this. And then sometimes you have this narrow band of creative right in the middle where they both overlap. Like for those nerds who might know about this, the Craig Mullins of the world, the sort of rare person who can just seems to do good with everything they try to create. And I think that maybe there's something of a similarity in herpetoculture where, you know, we have folks who are maybe a bit of a specialists. Maybe we have folks who maybe I might be painting with a bit of a broad brush here, but I think, you know, we all kind of know those people, right? We you know, like I consider myself as somebody who's probably more of a specialist. Like I you know, per our conversation before we started recording, like, I don't know, for some reason, it's like I seem to struggle with some of the other stuff that I work with. You know, I tend to do well with like a narrow band of things. And as soon as I step outside that zone, I'm just way less capable. Whereas, you know, you get these other folks who seem to be capable of interpreting the needs of a lot of different species, and they are able to do it really well and in a way that is, you know, leads them to a certain bit of success. And I'm, you know, do either of you guys, both Bryan and Roy, do you guys have any thoughts on like where that comes from, or why the hell that's a thing, or you know, what do you guys think about that?
I think, I mean, the first thing that came to mind hearing you say that was that I feel like I'm grateful for both of those types of people in herpetoculture, because each of them has their own place. Each of them are important in their own way. And yeah, there's just like, I'm like, I love seeing stuff that other people are doing. Like in both of your guys' collections. I mean, I love Euromastics. I think they're amazing. And I would like, man, I look at those. I also look at like some of those Abronia that are out there, and I'm just like, man, yeah, if I did arid stuff. But I just, you know, you can only keep so much. But I think it's cool and it's important, as especially for people who are getting into it, to like, if you find something that you like and you're successful with it, yeah, you know, go with that, maybe if it feels right, it works out, you know. But it's like, yeah, if I just think it's important to have those specialists. And hey, if somebody is like a generalist doing multiple things, that's awesome. That's really cool too. And you know, for me, as far as from a business perspective, it's helped me in that respect, just because, you know, each one are their own little micro market. Getting everything's different, and you can have something one year that's, you have a bad season with one thing, or you have something that is all of a sudden selling really well, and then the next year or something. It's nice to have that diversity, but it's also cool, if you've got a genus down pat in general, or just a group of animals. It doesn't even need to be like, you can still have, like, I don't know, would you really consider yourself to be you could consider yourself to be like a genus specialist, for Uromastyx, let's say, or if you were to do like the Phrynonax Spilotes cluster, yeah, in a sense, you're kind of specializing on a group. But if they're of interest and you're kicking butt with them, I think that's great.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm just jealous, man. I just I want to be able to do good with everything. I'm jealous of these people who can generalize. I don't know. Anyway, sorry, Roy.
It brings up a question for me of like, I wonder how much like those differences are tied to like what keeps the keeper inspired and motivated. Like I think that some people would struggle to stay motivated, stay inspired, if they were keeping, a single species or a single genus or something like that. Like I think that for me, I've spoken about this on our podcast before, but part of what is so motivating and exciting and inspiring for me about herpetoculture is getting to work with all these disparate ecological niches and observe them in their different like little behaviors and stuff like that. That's part of what keeps me excited and motivated, and that's part of the reason why I've prioritized a pretty eclectic collection, even though within that, like, I have some specialization, like with with the, like you said, the Spilotes Phrynonax kind of thing, or with the Polycris, for example. I don't know. It makes me wonder, like,
You're a generalist.
How tied,
too many different things going. You don't fit into that category.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I can accept that. I can accept that I'm a generalist, but again, it really makes me wonder, like, is that the key that's important there? Is that like the keeper is inspired and motivated, and it seems like for some things it could be, and for other things maybe not.
Yeah, perhaps so. Sometimes, like in the art world anyway, it always seemed to me to be like a personality difference, like the folks who tended to be the most sort of rock and roll, bad to the bone, industrial design types, the ones who could create a crazy machine that, like visually would look like some sort of death robot on another planet. Or the ones who could design the sort of starships that you'd see in any of your favorite sci-fi films. They had a totally different personality than the ones who were creating, the more organic, character creature stuff. I mean, it was just like a different person in some regard. I mean, obviously there was some overlap. We're all kind of the same in some way, but it was like a different person. And I kind of feel like, I don't know, but I'm not sure. I see the same. Maybe it's because I haven't met quite as many of us in person, but it doesn't seem like there's the same kind of dichotomy in herpetoculture. When I meet people whose entire profession is ball pythons, they're still pretty cool. There's still some pretty cool, interesting folks. And they think about things in some, some unique ways, or maybe they have really interesting ideas. Like a good friend of mine, Josh Markey, he's got, I talk with him all the time, and he thinks really, really deeply about herpetoculture, really, and not just it's not deep, but it's also just broad. He just has really interesting concepts around the kinds of ways he's thinking about what we do. And it's kind of main squeeze is ball pythons at the moment, he's got some other rad projects, but it's, that's kind of like the main thrust of what he's done for the last significant length of time. And then you have, other folks who seem to be so capable. Some of the most gregarious, intense, kind of energetic individuals that I've ever met have been folks who work with something so different from what I'm keeping over here. It's awesome. It's like, it's really, really cool. Yeah, I don't know. It's just sort of a something that's been on my mind for a little bit. I was curious where you guys fell on that. Um, with that in mind, Bryan, can you just tell us a little bit about, I mean, I've been paying attention to the work you do for a minute, but can you talk a little bit about like the scope of what you're doing? And I mean, obviously, don't feel, I don't need, not trying to like get you to tell us like what's every little thing. I would just love to hear a little bit about sort of the scope of your work, because you have such a you have a really dynamic collection with a lot of really cool things happening. So it'd be great to hear.
Thanks. I would say, so kind of if you were to take a look into my collection or on my, I'd say in the collection, not everything on the pages is always well represented as far as in the social world, but heavy geckos, heavy tree monitors, and that is also work with green tree pythons still, and one Aussie dwarf monitor, the Varanus pilbarensis.
Hey,
A lot of different gecko species. It's heavy geckos, and just I would say in the past few years since I've been able to kind of figure out tree monitors and see that I can have success with them, and that they're incredible, and that they're also something that really needs to be bred more in captivity, arguably more than anything out there, I would say, just because of how lax the regulations have been on the side of kind of where they're coming out of. It's something that I've really put a lot of focus into. So I would say my focus now has gone heavily towards the tree monitors, just because there really aren't many people. I know of one person who's consistently producing a wide array of species of them, which is Brandon Van Asten up at Canadian Cold
oh
Blood.
yeah.
But other than that, it's like, you'll have there's breeders out there who are having success, or producing, whether it be a couple clutches or a clutch here and there. There's also some other folks who are having more consistency within a given species of tree monitor, but I want to be able, I want to flood the market with captive bred, healthy tree monitors, and basically make this whole interest of wanting to get something that is wild caught just a thing of the past, just because they're such different animals. They're totally different beasts, captive bred versus a wild caught imported animal. And so that's kind of where my focus is right now.
How did you come to the tree monitors in particular, but also some of the other geckos you're working with? How did you come to those as a focus? Was it something that you were always really, really intrigued by and like stuck with until you had some success, or did some initial success lead you to focus on some of that stuff, or did it?
I would say the heavy interest in geckos was also kind of traced back to my childhood, as far as going to Hawaii and them having a handful of different invasive species that were there. Just really caught me since I was just a little kid. I was just enamored with them. And so I think that exposure to geckos early on is what really caught my interest in them. And so I would keep them for a while, just different species when I was young. And I just kind of gravitated back into them. That's really what brought me back into the geckos, at least. And, as far as the monitors, if you've never kept monitors, you don't get it. They're different beasts. The intelligence is something that's more interactive. As much as I love geckos, if I had to get rid of everything, all of my animals, and I was just going to keep one reptile, it would be a species of tree monitor. So
that's really cool. I have quite a few more questions, but I want to kind of toss over to Roy, because I always tend to chat relentlessly. But
no, this is great. You're covering a lot of the same things I would be asking, but I wonder if you could just like expand a little bit about like what is so special about the tree monitors. I mean, obviously you've already spoken to that a little bit, but if you could just really zero in on that, because I agree. There's something just really enigmatic and different about them. So
I would say the intelligence first and foremost. The intelligence, I mean, there's a lot of intelligent there. Shouldn't say it's tough to gauge intelligence with reptiles.
yeah,
A lot of charismatic, really cool, interactive reptiles out there that I guess it would be, you'd be the judge in how you want to gauge intelligence on them. But from keeping green tree pythons and geckos, which primarily are, nocturnally active animals, they can be more boring. And so monitors they have just that extra activity during the day and that analyzation of like what you're doing. You come in, the tree monitors are looking at you. It could be an animal that, even when it hatches out of the egg, it could be a timid animal, and just watching it over time, learning that you're not something that is going to be a threat to it, and kind of gaining trust in you over time, and just watching how they hunt. Some food item disappears into either substrate or into a piece of cork bark, and they're getting their tongue in there and then reaching their head back and digging their arm in and grabbing things with their hands. They're extremely intelligent. To me, I perceive them as a higher intelligence reptile. And so, anything that has kind of more of those problem solving capabilities, which I'm sure you've seen, videos out there of people just enrichment situations for the animals and watching them ace it, and grabbing, it's all prey drive. But just and the colors on them, they keep me going. The past couple weeks, I've caught myself a couple times where I was in the room working with them, and I was looking at them. I'm like, what a privilege to be able to be working with these things, because they're just incredible. They touch back into that inner childhood passion of what captivated you in the first place. These incredible colors. Plus, I'm a sucker for anything that's arboreal. I tend to be really into arboreal stuff. So
I'm the opposite. I'm a sucker for anything that just wants to crawl on the ground.
I like both.
Too, man.
Just playing around. That's intriguing. So I've had some similar feelings around the Euros about this really strong desire to really, as you said, flood the market with captive bred animals, because they really, it just doesn't, it's hard for me to square, it's like the thing we talked about with Philippe de Vaugelis on one of our early episodes about, from few many kind of thing, like have a lower impact on the wild populations when possible, because why not? And it was interesting. I was talking with someone about this, and this person kind of presented me with maybe a counter argument to that, and I didn't really know what to say. And it was, you'd imagine that something like a ball python would, I know we're talking apples to oranges here. We're talking totally different animals. I get it, right? But this idea that if the captive propagation of an animal would conceivably reduce the desire for a wild caught animal. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say like a ball python stands in direct opposition to that, right? Because it's done the opposite. If anything, it's jacked up the demand for more wild caught animals, and those things are still brought in, or at least I think, right? They're still brought in all the time. I mean, I'm not like
in much lower numbers though, I think.
Is that right?
I think so.
Okay. That I didn't know.
I don't have an exact answer to that. As far as knowing how many ball pythons are coming out. What I will say, it's difficult to compare a species that has a very broad range and is found on a big landmass versus something that is found in a very geographically isolated or very small landmass.
Mhm.
So the problem that I see with, for instance, with tree monitors is, they're being loved to death. And
Mhm.
these animals are being like, take out the United States even from what's been coming in. I think they're such amazing animals. The colors on them and how they are, they're so incredible that there's just been this thirst for them.
Mhm.
And I don't think that that is going to stop until the Indonesian government does something to halt it, until maybe like they create some sort of breeding program over there where they can produce numbers of them and that's what gets exported out. That would be I think the ideal situation, because you know they're going to keep coming in. And
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
the problem with them is that they have not been getting into the right hands, and sometimes people get them, they don't know what they're doing. You have an animal that is freaked out and is not doing well. And, they're just, whatever that quota is, whatever the system is, they're maxing it out, and everybody and their brother is trying to get tree monitors down here. Any importer,
Mhm.
they're asking for any species they can get. And with these different species, with the exception of the greens, they're all found on these little tiny islands, and it's just not sustainable. Like
Yeah.
it's not going to be like this in the long term. I would say in the next 10 years, there's no way it can be sustainable. The amount that have been coming out is just not, I kind of roll my eyes whenever I hear people say like, oh yeah, like you see these like articles in Manga Bay about how, yeah, these animals are threatened with extinction because of the herp trade, because of, people who are keepers in captivity. And lots of times I'll roll my eyes to that, because they'll be talking about some species that's found in this humongous range, and like
Yeah.
collecting is not the main source of an issue to create them to be endangered or potentially an extinct animal. I feel like in a lot of those places where that collecting is happening, for instance, like when they were talking about Lanthanotus, I saw an article about that. And, they're talking about how, yeah, captive trade is just decimating them, and it's this terrible thing. And it's like the majority of their range has been converted to oil palm plantations.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I know people who've been out there who are literally finding Lanthanotus in ditches along these oil palm plantations.
Yeah.
And the animals are there existing, and to my knowledge, they were doing well in this disturbed habitat. So I don't know fully the range, like how big of a range Lanthanotus has. I just know that a lot of it has been destroyed already from
Mhm.
agriculture in that situation. With tree monitors, I do see that it could potentially be an issue with collecting for the captive trade, and it could be something that could drive extinction with them. Again, because of how small the range is. You're literally dealing with one tiny island where this species is found and where the other species is found, and it's just this sprinkling. And because of their popularity, it's been going nuts. And so that kind of makes me sad about the whole tree monitor thing. And sometimes I catch myself like wondering, like, man, like, yeah, ultimately I have a hand in that in some way, but in the other hand, like, I'm also like one person who's producing good numbers of them, like significant numbers of the species that I have that are of breeding age. So, on the other hand, if I can be someone who's producing a bunch of each of these species, like significant numbers each year, I don't know. I don't know if that's helping or not. I go back and forth with that a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, earlier you spoke briefly to just how different the captive bred and born are to work with, and how much better they are as captives. And that's something I have also experienced with like the Polycris. It's just another thing that's, up to this point, there's just no one really breeding them. And all of the stories are pretty much bad stories about what it is to work with the wild caught. And my experience with the captive bred is completely different. So I'm curious if you could speak a little bit about to that dynamic with the tree monitors, and also have you bred them into the F2 generation yet, or are they all currently F1s? What's the kind of how far along in that process are you?
I mean, as far as at my collection, like I have some animals that are like the offspring are, I had received some babies that were captive bred that I've now produced, but as far as producing my own F2, not yet. I'm probably a year away from that.
Cool.
So, but I was lucky with at least the Macraei, which are your blue trees, and the Ricingeri, which are the yellow trees, to get captive bred animals of each of those, which at the time when I got in, was extremely difficult, especially for the yellows. Blues, some folks who were having some occasional success with them, and obviously Brandon was doing really well with them up in Canada. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I got very lucky to get some captive bred stock to begin with. And that would, that's always, anytime, like even going back into the days with green tree pythons, like there was always imports coming in, but I would always, you could get an import for $400 and I was spending $2,000 an animal to get like quality captive bred stuff. And
yeah,
it's worth it. It's worth it. You want to support people who are doing good things in herpetoculture and who have put in work and in turn are giving you an opportunity to work with a very healthy animal versus something that you're getting in. And this kind of goes to what you were asking to elaborate on, is that difference between captive bred and wild caught. The trust with you and that animal is going to be totally different. The possibilities for parasites are going to be there with your wild caught stuff, obviously. And sometimes, these animals, like some of the ways that they've been caught is pretty traumatic, and they don't always come around. So you're really taking a gamble. People will always kind of be lured by that cheaper pricing of a wild caught animal. But it's, in the end, if you count up vet bills and have the time having to treat that animal, it doesn't add up. It doesn't really add up.
Yeah. Strong point. Very strong point. Yeah, I feel sort of a bit of a relatability there with the Euros too, because the Euros are ripped out of the wild at a pretty impressive clip sometimes. Now, some of them, yeah, they might have a very, very substantial range, but a lot of them come from conflict zones, especially ones like, say, Yemenensis. Yemen's a fail state. There's not exactly like a huge amount of like conservation effort going on, right? For understandable reasons, and it can be really challenging to kind of convince individuals to stick with certain stuff long enough to really see it through, to give it the opportunity to like develop here and grow here and flourish here before, in a way that you don't have to go rip them out from wherever they're from anymore, especially like risking, some of those animals going to Somalia or Yemen or some, various places to get lizards. People are like risking their lives to go get them. So it's such a wild world in a wild industry. I don't know. I kind of actually caught myself a little bit off guard going down this train of thought. I didn't really expect myself to get here.
Yeah, it touches on a lot.
Yeah, it really does. So,
well,
oh, go ahead, Bryan. No, you.
Well, there's one thing I wanted to touch on just before we get too far away from it. But earlier, I mean, you spoke about doing eco tours, spending a lot of time down in Latin America, and I'm just curious about if that influenced your perspective on herpetoculture or the way you approach herpetoculture, if at all, and how. Because I think for so many of us that like work with these, quote unquote exotic species, most of us haven't seen them in situ or haven't been in those kinds of environments. And so I'm just curious if it's changed things for you.
I would say that it really hasn't, for me. I mean, I always was kind of always been a herper as well.
Mhm.
So, you know, going out and seeing stuff in the wild has always been like the highlight for me. You know,
Yeah.
much prefer that. It's you know, I love herpetoculture, but to me, you know, and again, I catch myself conflicted sometimes with the whole conservation routes that I was, you know, considering to where I am.
Mhm.
And but yeah, the answer to that is, have the tours and all that going down there changed it? No. The only thing it's given me any added perspective on, I would say, is just like certain places have it, like, with going back year after year after year, like especially in Ecuador is where I did a majority of my guiding, and some of the places that you go to, it's incredible, you know, like areas that you would drive, you know, let's say you're 3 hours in a vehicle, and then 2 hours and, you know, having to walk to get into a place, and all of a sudden that extra 2 hours of that road that you had to walk in because it was all mud, you know, got paved. And then just like you going back a couple years later or every year and just being like, man, like this area used to be forest, this is gone, this is gone.
Whoa.
And you know, you like getting up to, a lot of this is coming from experiences down in the Amazon, and then like also this place in the Choco, which if you were to look at the Andes going through Ecuador on the west slope, even going up into Colombia, is the Choco. So it's like this amazing forest that is different. It's divided, you know, so you've got Choco that's over in the west, you go up to the top of the Andes, then you go down into the east and you've got Amazon. So you've got these different forests that are just divided by this massive Andes. In this area over here, that Choco is just like, in Ecuador at least, it has been pillaged, and it is just very little of it remaining. It's, I mean, it'll make me emotional, you know. It's the amount of stuff that is there, species that, I mean, I caught a Sicilian that was over 4 feet long, that still to this point has been, you know, nobody knows what it is, and it hasn't been found yet again. And places like that, I mean, it's like an island surrounded by just development, and it's just getting encroached. So anyway, I've gone down the rabbit hole with that. But if anything, where I was going with that is that brings me back to kind of thinking about endemic species in areas, and like thinking about this whole thing of herpetoculture, in that like, hey, do we have these animals in captivity? Yes. Okay. Are we breeding them? Because if not, for some of these species, you know, they will be extinct. And whether or not that herpetoculture will ever save them, you know, that's something that I think a lot of people say to justify keeping stuff. It's like, oh yeah, conservation. Like, you're not conserving anything, you know. There's very rare situations. I think like the Turtle Survival Alliance was one of the only few organizations or stories where you had keepers that ended up turning it into like a serious conservation organization that has helped save species from extinction. But otherwise it's rare, and it's a lot of smoke that people blow to, like, you know, justify their keeping of animals. But anyway, that's the only thing that travels has kind of opened my eyes to, is the rate of destruction. Sorry for the rant.
No, that's man, that's what this is all about. I feel like that's where some of the interesting parts of these conversations come up, is when there's a rant, when somebody's like, oh yeah, there's this other thing that's like either directly or like immediately adjacent to what we're talking about, or maybe even directly underneath what we're talking about in a way, you know. And I feel like this is something that always, there's like a weird point of contention here, you know. You bring it up, you brought it up there where you said, you know, a lot of people will use, you know, with the, you know, this weird cloak of conservation as like a you know, like a justification for what they do, and it's sort of not really, it's not terribly genuine or realistic. And I feel like, I mean, personally, I kind of take issue with the idea that we need a justification for it in the first place, but maybe that's a whole different conversation to be had. But you know, it is really, really complicated. I mean, you know, you don't even have to travel far to see some of the same things. I do a lot of herping in the Southwest of the United States, right? And you know, there's all these things. It's like, oh, you can't take these X number, you know, whatever lizard, snake, you know, what frog, you name it, turtle, tortoise, you can't take these things, but it's totally okay for you know, 5-mile housing development to come in and just bulldoze the shit out of this environment and build parking lots and shopping centers and houses on it. And it's like, you serious? Like that's cool. I just want to take 2 lizards, bro. Just 2. You know, I mean, it's like, it's such a bizarre,
It is.
you know,
It is, and it really falls into like, you know, you want to combat this, like it falls into governmental, you know, situations and issues, because yeah, they're the ones who are making these choices and these decisions. And yeah, I mean, it comes down to dollars for a lot of them, especially in like developing nations and stuff. So
yeah.
I just,
very true.
yeah, it's sad to see that.
Yeah, it is very much so. I mean, I feel like I always get a little bit torn here because, you know, there's a part of me that maybe wants to go another direction, but at the same time, I don't feel like there's any reason to shy away from some of what we're talking about. So at the risk of maybe leaving an equally interesting subject kind of behind us, maybe for another conversation one day, I'm kind of curious to ask you about. It's a bit of a. I know that a lot of the questions I ask might be a little bit broad or a little bit vague, but that's kind of how I think. I'm a little curious about what your goals, you know, and goals is maybe like not exactly the right word for this, but what are some of the things that you want to do going forward with the work that you're doing? Because I'm not sure it would be do much justice to what you're doing to say, well, I just expect for the next 30 years you're going to breed reptiles and retire. You know, like I feel like that's maybe like it's a simplification, and I don't mean to downplay it, because if that's what the next 30 years looks like, hell yeah, man, get after it. But I'm sort of curious, like, what are some of the things that you see in your future with your work? And then I have more that follows after this, so I'll leave it there for now.
With my work, I would say, yeah, I want to be successfully producing all species of tree monitors. That's the big thing. We'll see where the geckos go. But the tree monitors have really taken my passion, and kind of where, like, I have concrete things that I want to do with them, you know, and as far as production goes, and that's a goal of mine, is to have all species that have been coming in being produced, and to be able to offer healthy captive bred specimens of each of those species. If I want to get crazy pipe dream goalish here,
Let's go.
Yes.
I think, and again, this ties into kind of what we've been talking about. I mean, I'm sure the logistics would be a nightmare, and I'd be up against so many odds with it. But man, I would love, if I can continue the type of success that I've had with the McRae and the Reisinger, if I could somehow get over and create some sort of a breeding facility in Indo that I don't even profit from, man. I just want to go over there at some point. Like, this could be my send off, would be to go over there, work with whoever need be. If I've got to talk to TSA to figure out ties, or talk to people who've been doing exports, whoever it may be. But I would love to set up some sort of captive breeding facility for those species over there, so that not a single tree monitor has to be plucked out of the wild again. That would be like, I would feel good about my work with that, you know. with what I'm doing now, it's like, I don't know. Everybody's driven differently. And I feel like we all look for a sense of purpose in what we're doing. And while I enjoy breeding reptiles, and I love doing it, I love working with them, and it's been good to me, and I've been able to create a successful business out of it. I do struggle sometimes in like kind of having what is like a purpose of good, and I feel like doing something like that could help conservation. It could still allow people over there to make money, but it would be something that could hopefully have an impact to stop, the harvesting of these things. Because again, as I said before, I don't see it as being sustainable. I don't think it's going to last, and I would hate to see the extinction of something because of, how cool they are, and how loved they are. So that would be pipe dream, send off, like sell off my business, I'm done. And that's what I go focus on, is to like take whatever knowledge I've built up here and to create something, just some incredible facility, and have like, again, just train people on how to do it and walk away from it. I wouldn't want any part in any profits or anything. I just want it to have that knowledge there, to know that babies are being produced in quantity to fill the thirst for them everywhere else.
Yeah, that's quite
That'd be
laudable.
amazing.
Yeah, that'd be great. Pipe dream. I mean, hey, who cares if it's a pipe dream? Get after it, right? I love that stuff. It's not, it's hard to do, but still.
I think like even if they held back, if they held back a year even of their quota. I don't even know how the quota system works over there. I've heard that there's like illegality of like getting them out from where they are, but once they're in Indo, it's like a legal thing. I don't even know how it works. I know that it's getting cleared on Indo side and on the US side for import and export. So somehow it's being done. But even if they just held back, if they started with a base of 5 pairs of animals of each species, or 6,
yeah.
I think they could crank, and they could send more healthy animals to anywhere they wanted with that kind of setup. And that'd be cool. That'd be cool to be a part of, because that would help conservation, I feel like,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Totally.
Oh, that's great. I really like that quite a bit. So then I suppose that would bring me to the next question I had, which feels sort of apt here, which is do you, and I hesitate to ask it because I feel like if I phrase it incorrectly, it might sound like I'm asking you to like industry bash, and that's not my intention at all. I guess I'll ask the question and I'll try to repackage it a little bit. From your vantage point, would you be able to say, oh, I have, there's some trends or some things that I see occurring in herpetoculture, at least stateside, that I could say I'd like to see this change, or maybe critiques or anything that you might have in that vein for herpetoculture and what we do here. And again, I don't intend it to be like, well, there's all these assholes doing X or Y. That's not my intent at all. I guess it's more of like maybe the better way to phrase this would be, if you could give your 15-year-old self advice on some things to do in the future, if you could go back in time, talk to 15-year-old Bryan and be like, listen, man, that have not specifically reptile advice, not the other stuff. You're like invest in Tesla. I'm telling you, that's
yeah. So you're asking me if, like, what things I would like to see change in modern day herpetoculture. Is that correct?
Yeah, broadly, or maybe something that
What's your constructive critique of herpetoculture? Softball question, sorry.
I think it's been going in the right direction. Yeah, I just want to see more stuff being produced in captivity. I love, and I don't like, this is where I guess it could get tough, is because everything has to come out of the wild at some point.
Yeah.
And again, I've been directly involved into getting animals that were, had been imported as well. And so I think there's a place for that. But it would be awesome to see, like, I guess it would just be awesome to see that aspect of it, like where people are producing enough stuff here in the States or and wherever they may be, that there's just enough captive bred healthy stuff to go around. I guess that's the main thing I see. People who work with morphs of super common species, that's cool too. I've got no problem with that. I've got crested geckos, and I think ball pythons are incredible. So people have to work with what they want to work with. So I don't see any harm in any of that, but it's cool. Like, I get excited when I see keepers like yourselves who are working with stuff that is not necessarily super well represented, and to see that production going on with that stuff, because it's cool. Because some of that stuff may disappear, from the import list. It's like, yeah, there's a handful of genera that are out there that's happened with in the past, and so it's cool to see that stuff getting produced.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so would you answer differently if it was like, hey, if you could go back and talk to 15-year-old Bryan and say, hey, do this, would it be something different, or would it be like, hey, get some tree monitors and get started right now?
Well, I think I don't really have any advice for myself back then that early on. I mean, the only thing that I can think of that would be like a regret again was when my buddy Derek sold off his collection.
Yeah.
He's not grabbing a lot of the stuff that he had, but you can't foresee that stuff. Some of his collection that he had was amazing, and you just don't know. Like, who would have thought that the New Caledonian gecko market would be as crazy as it is?
Yeah.
Prices that people pay on those things, it's insane. But it all just, it all boils down to people who have cash who want something that you don't want to sell, and next thing you know, prices get pretty wild. So,
yeah, true that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
You guys can't hear that noise, can you?
I can't hear it.
Okay, well, I'm gonna shut my shop door. I had it open for the heat, but there's somebody drilling out here. So you continue. Got this.
So one thing you spoke to earlier, and one thing that you didn't mention when you were kind of running through your collection, but that I've seen on your socials a little bit, is the Abronia, and just something that you seem to be, it just seems different a little bit from the other stuff that you're keeping. And so I'm wondering if that is like, well, first of all, how does that work logistically? Like, do you have a cool room for the Abronia, or how do you manage that? And what draws you to those lizards, and how's that project unfolding?
Yeah, it's that has been an interesting project for sure, and that was something that kind of was, my buddy Derek had kind of talked me into that, into working with them, because my plate was kind of full. But yes, they're a different setup. They're a different, climate zone, so they are kept differently than I keep. Obviously, they're kept differently, but in a different room, temperature zone than I do my other animals. And so kind of, they're definitely a different beast, a different setup, but they've been going well. I mean, there was a time where, they were coming in quite a bit, and there were some people who were doing some shady things, bringing them in, who ended up getting busted. But you get a lot of these animals that would come in and would drop litters. They'd drop these litters of babies. And there were a couple people who were having success in producing them as well. So kind of like where my foundation came from was those people who were having success breeding them. I tried to get, as many of those offspring as I could. But in addition, supplementing, if I saw someone like, Joe Schmo who got this animal, don't know what they're doing with it. Oh, hey, it dropped all these babies. And, I would in turn try to, do what I can to get those as well. So the foundation for where I got my, that founding stock, they were all very young animals. And so kind of been able, there's a couple supplemental things along the way where like someone had gotten an animal as a baby and they raised it up and they ended up moving it off, or they had a long time breeder and their female dropped or what have you. But there's a few species that I work with now, and I've been able to have breeding success with 2 out of the 3, and right now I'm sitting on a female from that 3rd species that, I'm checking her twice a day to see if there's going to be babies running around. But so far this season, I've gotten 3 litters, and they're all doing really good. Last year was tricky. I've produced them 3 years in a row now. First year was good, some mixed results. Last year was pretty rough in that the babies can be extremely fragile and sensitive. And unfortunately, a lot of those babies didn't end up making it. There was a small handful that did, but this year, everybody's been really strong with the babies that I've gotten so far. And so, and again, these animals that are producing these are animals that when I got were tiny little babies. So it's been a long time of raising them up and getting them to proper size and making sure everything's right. And to see kind of that project go full circle is really rewarding, especially now because you don't see them coming in anymore. There's a couple people, one major player who got busted as he should have, from what's going on. And, now you just don't see him anymore. So it's like, it's nice to be able to produce some of those, and anybody who's producing them, which there really aren't many people at all who are doing it in the States.
Was there a major change that you made that resulted in the more robust babies this year versus last, or was it just maturity of the animals?
I heard something about not giving the babies calcium with vitamin D3.
Interesting.
Whether or not that, but my first year doing it, they were getting calcium with vitamin D3 and they all were fine. But last year it's just like, whether or not maybe throughout the winter kind of cooling months, if the females weren't getting the exact nutrition they needed. But this year I've kind of tried to be more diligent about that kind of in the off season, because they're like, I have several different breeding seasons that I'm kind of waiting. My geckos and my rock monitors kind of go from like a January start, and it ends like around September, and then from September up till January it's kind of chill time. The tree monitors are going year round, and then for the Abronia, those are basically introductions in the fall, so they're getting paired up right around September, and then babies start happening like around now, last month into this month essentially when you get babies. But they but they kind of go through that little winter kind of cooling period as well. So there's several different things that are kind of being manipulated with that, and currently I'm kind of making a setup so that I don't like having animals in my house, so able to have like setups where stuff aren't in the house, and I don't have to worry about crickets running across the floor. It's nice. It's nice to be in a house where you don't have to worry about stink coming from one area because an animal just went to the bathroom, or it's cleaning day, or something that didn't be eaten. So anyway, but that answers your question on them with that project a little bit.
Yeah, of course. I've always just been really curious about that genus. Obviously, it's just such a charismatic genus. And
they're finicky. They're definitely sensitive, especially the babies. Did I lose you guys?
Nope.
There we are.
Oh, okay.
Oh, good.
I get terrible internet where I live, so
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully it doesn't get too spotty. So another thing I'm kind of curious about is, it sounds, from what I gather here, you have had a, pretty interesting life. I mean, that doing guiding and stuff like that that's a pretty badass, rad way of going about living. And I'm curious with sort of like the host of things that you do, and I'm sure you've got other things that you do outside of what you're doing now. Like I'm sure you've got like hobbies and friends and family and all this other stuff. How do you maintain like a work-life balance? Is there anything that stands out to you as something that is especially important for you? And then further, are there any people that you sort of look to that you find as like sort of motivating or like role model type figures, both, whether inside of or outside of herpetoculture?
That's a good question, and that's something that I'm currently struggling with. So
The work-life balance part?
yeah, it's hard. Again,
Yeah.
and I can, like, again, some of this is it's all my own doing. I'm to blame for it all. I just need to get an additional employee to help me out. But that's the key. It's hard, there's pluses, there's pros and cons to it. It's great to be your own boss. It's great to be able to like work from one main area. I don't answer to anybody, and it's been good. I've been fortunate in that, like, the production's been there, and the species that I work with have, there've been animals that are, have been in demand. So I feel very grateful for that. The bad side about it is, there's always something going on. The level at what my collection's at now is a lot. It's pretty intense. There's always something that needs to be cleaned. I feel like there's always something going on. And I've been recently in this mindset of like, man, I'm treading water. Like I'm handling the majority of my maintenance. I'm doing all of my web design. I do all the photography. I have to do the photography editing. I have to do all of the uploads to the website for the advertising, for the shows, all of that I do. And now, like, I'm very grateful for my employee, Mike, who's been helping me out. And he's allowed some breathing room, because for me, I have to be doing some sort of, like, my life is basically taking care of reptiles and exercising and trying to get out and do something social. Because again, when you work from, a reptile facility, I'm not interacting with tons of people. Yep. So it's hard to get out.
You're interacting with tons of reptile people.
Yeah, I am on occasion, but I'm not seeing them on the daily. And someone who's like working a job where they're going in and seeing a bunch of people or going downtown, like I'm not doing that. And I kind of live in an isolated area, so it's tricky. It's tough on like mental health. So for me, I have to be like, I run, or I'll go do yoga, or I'll go weight lift. I have to do something. I'll bike. I mean, anything, but I have to be doing that almost daily. Otherwise, like, I get crazy. So I have to do that. But
sounds very familiar.
And then trying to do things like socializing, it's tough. It's tough.
That's true. Socializing.
I feel like the socializing part really it just got exacerbated by the pandemic too. I feel like we're all like, or at least I'll speak for myself, I feel like I'm learning how to socialize again after being in quarantine, living rurally for 2 years. And
it shortened people's tolerance, man. I feel like COVID, including my own. I mean, and a lot of people I know, it's just like the tolerance to be able to deal with things, or to have, like, I feel like I had more tolerance, like I was more capable of tolerating BS and things. It's like, I'm so much quicker to be like, F it,
Maybe that's a gift in the long run.
I don't know. Maybe.
It remains to be seen.
Maybe.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can relate to the need for physical activity too. It's like it gets difficult sometimes when you have to find and squeeze in time to go hit the gym or get out for a run or things like this. My fiance and I moved into a new apartment complex at the end of last year, and it's been a damn godsend because there's a weight room right 2 floors down. I can just go downstairs and hit the weights. Oh, thank God. I didn't have to go over to the jiu-jitsu academy where I was training in order to get access to the weights there. I just have them right downstairs. It's awesome.
It's so important. I feel like people people who don't do it, I feel like don't understand just because they haven't done it. But like, there's so many people where it's like, man, any form, I don't care what it is, if it's tennis or paddling or whatever, if you just do something and make it, habit, it's gonna help you so much. It's just gonna help.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, so we're creeping up on, we're like 90 minutes or so at the moment, so like around an hour and a half. So I want to be super respectful of your time, Bryan, and Roy, yours as well. And I was thinking maybe Roy, I want to let you go ahead and if there's any other questions that you have before we kind of hit our last one in particular. Do you have anything else you want to throw out here before we hit this last interesting topic that I'm sure I'm actually kind of excited to ask about?
Yeah. I mean, I think we should just go for it, because that last question that you asked was kind of the one I had in mind as well, which was basically the same question, but like, what are the personal practices you have that kind of sustain you outside of herpetoculture? But it sounds like we know that.
Yeah. Breaking a sweat and picking up heavy shit and putting it back down. It sounds
something like that.
All right. Well, so Bryan, we have this closing question that we like to ask every guest. And it's why herpetoculture? And that can be kind of taken as broadly or as narrowly as you like. Why do we do this? What's the whole damn point of all of this crap, man?
Or why do you do it?
Or why do you do it? Any of that's good. All of it's good.
Yeah, that's interesting. Why do it? I would say it's something that I've always done first and foremost. And I kind of going back to that childhood thing, I remember vividly one evening in particular where I was in my bed and I was writing down all of the species that I wanted to work with and breed one day when I got older.
Yeah, I did.
I was little.
Yeah.
Right, obviously. But I think the best answer that I can give you as to why herpetoculture is because it gives you an opportunity to have a personal experience with a species that has been unreachable, but now all of a sudden is reachable. And you can now not only just like see it in a zoo or see it in a book first, then maybe see it in a zoo, but now, oh my, like you're telling me that I can have that thing here in my house, and I can create this environment for it and raise it up and keep it successfully. And now like I can even breed this thing. I can try to get babies from this. I think at the root of it, that's why herpetoculture. I will say I wouldn't have as many animals as I do if it weren't for the business aspect. So as much as everybody, I could sit here and lie to you and say, yeah, man, it's all about the love. No, it's not all about the love. It is about some money as well. It is about some business as well, because if it was just about the love, maybe I'd have like 5, not 500. Okay.
Yeah.
That no longer, at that point, but that point is the business aspect of it, obviously. And I don't always believe people when they, especially people who have large collections and they say, oh yeah, no, man, it's not it's all about the love for this. It's like, yeah, sure, there is a lot of love. It's why you're in it in the first place. But you're telling me you'd have 300 ball pythons or as many just because, like, come on. But yeah, man, I think it just goes back to the fact of that whole curiosity. It goes back to the childhood curiosity of seeing that amazing thing in a book, and you can't interact with it. You can't see it, which is also why, like, I love herpetoculture. It's my life. But man, would I prefer to see, like, if I had an experience of, like, could you keep a tree monitor or whatever species of Uromastyx? Like, to me, it's always best to see them in the wild, to be able to see it, just sit back and watch it, that's why I love herping. And but yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh yeah, very much.
Answer.
That was a great answer. We've had it's been super interesting to me. I'm just waiting. So we're like almost 40 episodes into this, and we haven't got a single repeat answer to that question. And I'm just like waiting, like, when's that gonna hit? Like, is somebody gonna tell us, like, oh yeah, that's what waiting for someone else to like copy Philip Tremper and say it's a disease, because that's what which is like, to this day, is my favorite answer, honestly. Like, it's just such a funny, God, that guy's funny. But that was a great answer, man. I appreciate that particular response. I think it's well articulated, well thought out. So I'm really into that.
I rambled a bit, but yeah.
Oh no,
It's good.
You did awesome, man. There's no we
can't all be as concise as Phil Tremper.
Yeah, right. Yeah, man, that's so true. Well, so then where can folks find you on all the internets and all that whatnot?
Yeah, the social worlds, Facebook and Instagram. Obviously, I do have a website as well, and those I do hit up a handful of shows throughout the year, so you can find me there as well. This East Coast kind of a band from Midwest down to Florida is where you'll find me at shows. But did you guys have any other questions, any specifics, anything you wanted me to kind of brush up on or specify more?
I mean, just how do you do, just tell me how to do a successful reptile business. Just tell me how to do this. Give me an A to B or an A to Z of like how to go from getting the first.
You're doing it, man. I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, because one of those that I enjoy checking in on the most, just because it's something that I'm not doing, and it's like, you seem to be doing very well with them, with the Uromastyx, and they catch my eye a lot. And boy, there was a point where I was keeping Poecilionotus, and that was, I had a very large collection of them back in the day when they first started coming in, when Gavin Brink was, I had quite a bit, and Jason Hood, and I ended up shifting ways. So I definitely enjoy all the species that you guys are working with. But I mean, from the Uromastyx, I think those things sell themselves. If you're asking, that, I mean, honestly, do you have trouble moving offspring?
No. That's not what no, not at all. I just meant, it's just a funny, I don't know, just in my mind, it seemed like a funny question. Maybe it was terrible. Maybe it was a terrible question. It's interesting. Like, I feel like if we were all at a show, it'd be great to like sit down and like just have a beer together and just bullshit about some of this, like the day to day of what we do. Because you know what, like, you talking about the way you feel sometimes maybe a little bit overworked, or like, you're carrying a really heavy burden in what you do, feels so relatable in so many ways. I at least speaking for myself anyway, things are going great. I'm super happy with the way the season's going. I mean, I'm shocked at the number of females that are laying quality eggs this year. So, I mean, if things keep going the way they're going, this is going to be a banner year for me, which is nice. And it's all fine and dandy. But like you said, you reach a certain point where you're keeping a certain number of animals, and there's always something that needs to be addressed, always something that needs to be cleaned, something that needs to be replaced, something that's going wrong in this corner, something that's going right in that corner that you want to pull from there and import into the rest of what you're doing. You know, you bulbs that go out, you know, wires that fry, you know, I mean, maybe not that, it's a little bit hazardous, but you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah, dude, that's my biggest fear.
Oh my God.
oh, same. Oh God, it's
Terror. Yeah.
yeah.
Same here.
Now, you know, I want to reiterate too, going back onto like, you know, why herpetoculture and everything, and when I was talking about the business aspect and like the amount of animals that I have, I will say too that I struggle, especially with like top caliber animals that I produce. I have a very hard time letting them go.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
So I could be, you know, in that respect, I'm kind of my own worst enemy, but obviously from a business perspective, it's smart too, because you want to hang on to the best stuff that, you know, that you're producing.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I do hoard and keep a lot more stuff. And that is because I love the animals, you know?
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, and there's I think there's more interesting stuff here too, which is like, I'm sure that you're in similar situations with the tree monitors, in the sense that they're so like fresh in some regard, you know, like there's only you and a handful of other folks that even managed to get them going.
Mhm.
There are revisions and troubleshooting and refinement practices that, you know, the first time, I'm sure the way you're working and keeping things now probably differs a great deal from when you first started, right? Or at least in some regard, right? And same thing here, you know, there's so many things, like I've talked about a little bit about this in a handful of other shows, but you know, breed ornates one time for 1 year, cool, great. Like it's tough and it's a challenge, and I'm happy when I see anybody do it and have success with it. It's great. But I'll tell you what, 10 years and 4 generations is a very different thing than getting them. I mean, as you know, right? Like it's a totally different animal, and there are ways that you will be surprised by the challenges you encounter. You're never gonna, you can't anticipate, you know, like when I was asking you about if you could go back and talk to 15-year-old Bryan, what would you say? And you're like, well, you can't anticipate some of that stuff. It's like, yeah, you can't, there would be no way to anticipate the kind of challenges that present themselves when you're dealing with animals for that length of time. Like nobody knows what the breeding lifespan of an ornate Uromastix is, no less any of the others, the Thomasai, the Nigroventris, Princeps, Thomasai, Yemenensis, no clue. We don't know how long they're supposed to live. We don't know how long they're supposed to breed. We don't know what their ideal diet is. I mean, a solid 50% of what I do is literally flying by the seat of my pants, just doing the best I can with the information that's out there. And I mean, maybe that's like, I don't mean to make it sound like I'm just fucking around here. Like, I mean, I put a lot of, as you do, Bryan, and as you do, Roy, like I put a ton of thought. I feel like I'm thinking about this all day, every day. It's almost the only thing that bounces around in my crazy cranium, you know? And like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just it's a hell of a challenge and a hell of a thing to try to continue to push yourself to do every day and every year, and you never know what way it's going to go. I've got 3 godforsaken incubators here, and my biggest, you know, you mentioned fire. One of my biggest fears is a power outage in the middle of winter when it's -5 outside, and I, you know, and I don't notice that the alert. Yeah, right. I know, totally. You know, like that's a huge fear. All of these things are big fears. You know, how do you eliminate single points of failure? You know, how do you ensure, because and you said it, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. I know this going all over the place, but like, you love the animals. So it's like, when you love the animals, you want to make sure that every one of them is getting the absolute best that you can. And inevitably, the more numbers and the longer you go with more numbers of animals, you're going to have things happen. And you have to try to tease apart. Was this my fault? Was this an accident? Was this something I can fix? Or was this something to be expected when you have this many numbers? You know, just like with people, Some of them are going to get hit by a car and have heart attacks, right? Like maybe we could talk about the preventability of heart attacks, but on a different podcast. Maybe. But all of that.
Now we're back to lifting weights.
Yeah. And hitting that bike, bro, running some miles. But really, for so many of the animals that the three of us work with anyway, a lot of that's totally unspelled out. Like, we're going to be the ones writing the books in 50 years about, well, when you keep an Egyptian Uromastix for the length of its lifespan in a certain way, you're going to see weird things come up if you don't give them X, Y, and Z. And you won't know that until you're the person to do it. God damn it. It's, I don't know. I feel like I'm actually having a bit of a therapy session here now. So
All right, me too. This is all good. It's good to hear. I don't know. I know for sure with a lot of those Latin American colubrids, there was really nothing to go from.
Yeah.
As far as any information to pull from. With Uromastix, was there a lot, like, who was doing it big before you? I'm so unplugged in the Uromastix world. I know there's like a couple folks over in Europe, but I feel like that was one of the things that I feel grateful for with the tree monitors, is I was able to talk with a couple different breeders, one of which was Brandon and the other which was High and Yoen at Naked Dragons down in Florida, to kind of see what they were doing and to pull from that. Because I feel like in our age range, I know we're different slightly, but kind of in our generation, we definitely, like, well, we're pioneers in some ways, but we aren't like the old heads. There's like some guys who've been at it for a long time and who've laid down some foundational work. Like,
right.
I can't sit there and say, like, like being able to talk to people, to have mentors, to have people who've been in, working with species that you've had is very helpful. And especially today, there's not been a better time for herpetoculture, because a lot of these species, there's some talented people out there who are having success and working with stuff. So with Uromastix, were you able to, like, I know you're saying that you're doing a lot of stuff that's kind of like trying to figure it out as it comes and working on X, Y, and Z, but who's out there doing it before you big time?
Yeah, great question. So I can probably get to this in two parts, right? So people who helped me out early on, there's quite a few of them. So you've got Camille Hammers, first and foremost. He's in the Netherlands. He's doing it longer than me, and he answered so many of my questions and helped me through the first time I bred Euros. I mean, he gave me so much feedback. He continues to this day to be a treasured friend. He's a wonderful person. We've had him on the show. He's just the sweetest guy, really, really wonderful person. I love him to death. Some of the folks before I ever met Camille who laid some of the groundwork, at least stateside, were Douglas Dix, Lindsay Pike, Randy Gray, and Audrey Vanderlinden. And some, but the
how many of them are still working with Euros? I know Camille is, but the folks I just mentioned here in the States, zero, none. There were a couple of guys. You got Noel Alt, Scott Wilson, who works with Euros right now, who's still doing it. I would say probably the biggest distinction, though, between what they were doing and what I'm doing now is they were the ones who were seeing some of the first importations of some of these species ever, or at least in memory anyway. And they were the ones who were going to the importers, parsing out what the hell we even got. What did we get here? Did we get one species of a million of one things, or did we get 3 different species in this shipment? Sometimes that happened a lot. You get shipments from Yemen that would have 3 different species of Euro in it, and they had to kind of figure that out. They had to try to figure out what are the initial problems you're going to encounter when they first come in from the wild. What are some of the things that are going to get them to eat in the first place? Yeah, a lot of those folks that I listed had some of the very first captive propagation of those things in captivity. What those folks didn't have, and again, this is not a critique, it's just
just a statement about the way things are. They did not have the longevity and the consistency across many years with those same species for several generations in. You know, most of them, with a few exceptions, it was F1 and it ended there, whether that was because of changes in their plans, changes in the circumstances of the animals. And there was a lot of what they were doing that was good information for the time, but didn't hold up to when you do it for a very long time. And then the last thing I'll say, and again, I really don't, this is not intended to like toot my horn or say anything about what I'm doing. It's just the circumstance of time is I don't know of anyone that I'm aware of who are doing it at a particular scale, right? You know, Cam, I love him. Again, one of my best friends, and he's been doing it for a very long time, but he does not have 50 pairs of ornates. And he, you know, and again, it's just a thing. It's just a circumstance of what I'm up to. But yeah, I think that scale, the scale thing is probably the primary distinguishing factor between myself and anyone else who has done it. And I think that scale and then the longevity over time are probably the two things that give me any insight or any contribution to Uromastyx as a whole. It's probably just those things, I think.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Cool, man. One day I'm gonna end up with an ornate.
Yeah, soon enough. Yeah, you just let me know, and I'll get you one that's friendly and probably about as colorful as a panther chameleon, but lives on a rock. You know, so you let me know if you got those Pilbara going. You could do an ornate easy because it's the same thing basically, minus the bugs. I mean, they do eat some. They'll eat, you know, they'll snag some mealworms here and there, but you know, in terms of, you know, like the environment, it's basically the same.
There's too many cool things out there. I've also thought of getting like a big kind of behind me, like walling this off in some like big glass enclosure and doing do a bunch of live plants in there, deck it out, and do a sulfurous in there.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
There you go.
Yeah, now's the time. Roy's got babies.
That's awesome.
True.
That's
Yeah.
cool. They're so cool.
They're amazing.
Basins, and that is a species that's like been elusive to me out in the wild. I've spent a lot of time in the range, not gotten them. Gotten notice. I've gotten the Shropshire in the Choco. That was a cool one, but I've never gotten sulfurous.
Yeah, everyone I've spoken to said that lives down there says that they're not common. Like they don't see them regularly.
No.
So
it's the Amazon finding one of any, like the only species that I've seen that's common. They say like rare things are common and common things are rare. Weird. Which is kind of weird to think about, but basically alludes to the fact that like most of the species of reptiles that you see, it's like finding lots of different species is a common thing, but finding one species like all the time is a very rare thing. And the only species that I've noticed to be common down there is the Hymentodes, tree snake. But yeah, maybe one day it's still furious.
Wow. What is there anything from your time out there in the field anywhere that just is sort of like stands out as like a memorable encounter with a wild herp that just was like, wow, that just stuck with me for some reason? Yeah,
they're all special. I mean, there's so many. I mean, in anything too. I am, as far as appreciation of wildlife, I am a generalist. I mean, I'm out there birding.
Oh, nice.
Backlighting at night for insects. I love it all. So, but the coolest things you can ever see is whenever there's some sort of an interaction going on, whether it's a feeding interaction, if you catch something that's eating something else, or something that's mating, or something weird going on, some weird behavior, that always spices up the experience, you know. But
Sure. Wow, man. That's cool. I'm pretty jealous of that. My field herping experience has been pretty limited, like to
Down
almost
to Morocco, dude. You got to go to
That's-
Morocco.
No,
I've seen arrows. I've seen what's the species? Is it like the Negro?
Yep.
Nigraventus.
Ventris and then Acanthonura.
Okay, I got the Negro tell me. Say it
Nigraventris.
one more time.
Nigraventris.
Nigraventris.
Yeah.
That is the species that I got out there.
That's lucky, man.
Greenback, right? Big greenback, black body, or is that a different species?
No, so you're right. So all the Moroccan Uromastyx, there was Uromastyx nigraventris and there's Uromastyx acanthonura, and they kind of both have their own quirks. They're that animal. You're either going to have like the lime green ones with black, or you're going to have the sort of orange and yellow ones. And then you can have like bicolors, and then but they've split it now. So like nigraventris is that whole thing. And then you've got acanthonura, which are the ones that occur in Algeria, but they're the same animal. They're just black and white, and
are they sexually dimorphic, the nigraventris?
no, they are,
because literally I caught a green specimen,
Yep.
photographed it, and 100 feet away is where I camped.
Yeah.
And then saw this orange one that was
Yep.
cruising on the hillside.
hell yeah.
That thing was fast.
Yeah. They are, so
Okay.
both sexes of that species get miraculously colorful. And we not 100% sure exactly like what causes that color differentiation, like which ones get orange, which ones get lime, which ones get bicolor, because that's actually a problem with a lot of Euros. We don't, like you got ornates too, where they have like a green, a blue, and a bicolor, and then there's a spectrum kind of inside those dominant color forms. And there's not a lot of clarity around how each species passes on that color, because you can have, say, for example, and this is the same thing is true of Moroccans. You can have a blue pair that produces babies, and some of them will be green, right? And it's really difficult to say. I don't know if it's polymorphism or what. I don't know. Believe me, I'm working on it, but I don't know. It's very difficult to try to parse out. But I'll tell you what, where I want to go is Oman, because in Oman I can see 3 species. I can see Thomasi, Aegyptia microlepis, and Bentai all in the same day. And that, to me, that's like the holy grail, because, Morocco, don't get me wrong, I want to go to Morocco because the Moroccans are so special and it's such an accessible area. Like there's no reason not to go. Plenty of places, Egypt, Jordan, Israel. I want to go to all those places, but Oman seems to be the money, because then I can see Thomasi.
No, man. Life's too short. Go. You'll feel so good too when you're sitting there looking at, it's like, like a heart connection when you're looking at the species that you pour so much of your time into. You have to. It's like a birthright of passage for you. You have to do it.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong at all.
We gotta do it.
And I don't mean to be that guy. Right now, it's very hard. I got to get I probably have to get another person at the shop in order to do that. I'm a general manager of a jiu-jitsu academy here in Colorado that I'd have to make sure would be stable before I can go anywhere. And then this year, anyway, my fiance and I are getting married, and we're going to Costa Rica for our honeymoon. So it's kind of hard to squeeze Oman inside that. But you're absolutely, believe me when I say it's right here. It's right there in the forefront of my mind, right in that prefrontal cortex, no matter what I do. So it's going to happen.
That's
Yes.
awesome.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Soon enough. Yeah. Maybe I can get Roy to go with me too.
I'll go. I want to go everywhere.
It's all
You gotta go to Suriname with me then.
My buddy Derek's come up a lot. He was out there.
Yeah.
Wow, he went to Oman.
Oh, yeah. I got another friend, Frank, who also has gone there, and he showed me pictures of like wild Thomasi and Aegyptia microlepis, and I say, you go to hell, sir. Damn you. Get out of here. Well, Well, hell, anyway, I think this is probably the right time to wrap it up. That was actually really fun. I think this is the first time where we've hit the why herpetoculture question and then just blazed right past it and continued to talk.
It is the first.
Awesome. It's awesome. I love
Glad
this
we did.
conversation. So real quick, Bryan, before you go, Roy, you want to hit that?
Yeah, I'll hit the button.